we were going to do this originally back in October, and then I was doing stuff, then you were doing stuff, and then tonight it was looking like it might not happen because of the internet gods were not cooperating, but cross our fingers.
The universe hates friendship.
Yeah, that's it. But our friendship, I don't know, prevailed.
Yeah, I was going to say transpired, and then I almost said perspired.
That too.
Our friendship perspired.
It did that too. Mm-hmm. Cool, man. Well, so we're doing Cicero's On Friendship, which is this... it's kind of confusing. Like, we were both kind of talking back and forth before about kind of getting our bearings on this, because the piece is a letter that Cicero writes to his friend Atticus, but the piece is written as a dialogue about this other guy named Laelius, and who is speaking about his friend Scipio. So I was a little confused at first, kind of what was going on, who was talking to who, but how I kind of understood this, and let me know if you were understanding it the same way. I understood that, okay, Cicero is writing to his friend Atticus about his friend Scaevola once told him about his father-in-law, Laelius, and Laelius's best friend Scipio. And then Cicero says to Atticus, hey, I'm going to tell you about this friendship between these two guys, but to kind of get rid of the confusion, I'm just going to write it as if I am Laelius. Is that...
Yeah.
Okay.
The last part is exactly how I thought of it. And then I skipped all of the like deductive work beforehand. Because it just made my brain kind of like crash. And I was just like, at the end of the day, like Cicero's kind of like Laelius, and that's that.
Right. Yeah, it is kind of like, it's kind of reminded me of like Plato's dialogues, where Plato, you know, he's writing kind of as Socrates.
Right.
And sometimes it's a little confusing to tell whether or not we're supposed to think whatever Socrates says is what Plato thinks, or if he's just kind of espousing somebody else's idea. So with this, it was similar, where I was kind of left going, I kind of think whatever Laelius says in this is what Cicero thinks, but it could still be the case that he's just saying like, oh, this is what this guy Laelius said about friendship, but like secretly Cicero's like, I don't agree with any of it. But I think we're supposed to kind of think that Laelius acts as what Cicero also thinks.
Yeah, I think so. In I see it as like the perfect crime too, because like these these Greco-Roman people just like wrote in these dialogues so they could take credit for like the really brilliant stuff, and then everything else that was probably like offensive at the time, I was like, that was all Socrates. That wasn't me.
It is a good out. Well, and I feel like that's like when I read fiction, sometimes it's hard to tell what the narrator actually thinks. Like reading somebody like Dostoevsky, he writes these characters who have very, very differing philosophies and viewpoints. And it's hard to kind of say like that character represents Dostoevsky. But then other writers, like I'm reading The Fountainhead by Ayn Rand right now, and it's very clear which one is her. Like there's this guy Rourke, and it's just like everything he says is just like in alignment with her philosophy. So it's pretty easy to say like whatever Rourke says maps onto what Ayn Rand thinks. But other authors, it's a lot more ambiguous.
Totally.
So I don't know. I guess with this, for the sake of simplicity, we'll just kind of say what Cicero, we'll kind of equate what Laelius says and what Cicero thinks as being the same thing, just for the conversation. Okay, sweet.
Yeah, love it. Or we could refer to everyone as Socrates and just give him all
Socrates,
the
credit. Yeah, exactly.
No, I love it. I think that makes perfect sense. Cicero, you're taking credit for everything today.
Cool.
If you're listening.
Cool. So this dialogue starts off if he's listening from up in the heavens. So the dialogue takes place at Scipio's funeral. So again, Laelius and Scipio were the great friends, and Laelius is at Scipio's funeral, and he is speaking about their friendship to a few other people whose names are not important. So cool. So this is mainly about friendship, obviously, but they kind of start off talking about death, at least at the beginning. There was one of these quotes. He said, quote, "All is as well as possible with him," meaning Scipio, "not so with me. For as I entered life before him, it would have been fairer for me to leave it also before him." I don't know. I thought that was kind of an interesting thought, that he's kind of saying, like, he's almost kind of saying death is worse for the living, the people that are left behind, whereas, the dead person is dead. And, at least Cicero or Laelius here believed in an afterlife.
But I think even if you don't believe in an afterlife, I think that perception kind of holds up still. That even if there's nothing in the beyond, then it's still up to the people living to deal with the burden of loss.
Yeah. Well, and I think he says that too. He says, and he says, quote, "If, however, the truth rather is that the body and soul perish together, and that no sensation remains, then though there is nothing good in death, at least there is nothing bad. Remove sensation, and a man is exactly as though he had never been born." So that's an interesting thought too, of like, we can't really feel bad for this person who died because they're no longer a person. They no longer exist. It would be like feeling bad for, someone who has not come into existence. But they wouldn't even be a someone at that point. It would just... So, yeah, it's an interesting thought.
Yeah, I think it beautifully alludes to what's coming right later, which is just the deep connection that they had, and in that moment, clearly, there's just like trying to, just trying to reckon with the fact that it's not, whatever they had is just not there, and he's the only person that is going to deal with it, and he's going to deal with it with his closest pals at this friendship hang at a funeral. Yeah,
totally. Yeah, and he's taken it pretty hard. And so he's kind of talking about death and how, Scipio is, either up in the heavens or he's just non-existent, so we shouldn't feel bad for him. But he's like, I'm having trouble here. And then he goes on from there to then speak about his like friendship or love for Scipio. And these two guys are kind of egging him on. They're just like, "Oh, you speak so well about him, like, tell us more about what you think about friendship." And he kind of says like, "All right, like, I'm no philosopher, but I'll
It's clear. Yeah. It's like everyone's dream, right? When you're like really passionate about something, like, no, I didn't have a flute, and then you just like pull it out of your sleeve, right?
It's totally like the anchor man, where he's like, "Oh, I wasn't prepared,"
exactly.
And then he's just like, "Let me recite this treatise that I've been."
Yeah,
it is a bit like that. He kind of does the humble. "Oh, I'm nobody to talk about this, but let me tell you about all of these things that I think."
Right, and like after the first maybe few back and forths, there's no more back and forths besides like you read it and it's like you see that like one of the other people is like and then like Layla just continues talking.
Totally. Yeah, it starts as a dialogue and turns into a monologue.
Exactly.
Sure. Yeah, and it's, I guess, kind of different between the Socratic dialogues are much more dialogues. It's, like question, like Socrates is asking the questions, and it's much more even in terms of how much each person is saying. Whereas here it's
yeah, it's just like I would love to tell you about friendship.
Yeah.
Do you have 3 hours?
Exactly. Pretty great. All right, so maybe we can talk a little bit about Cicero's definition of friendship, and kind of like what he says friendship is and what he says friendship isn't. So one of the things that stuck out to me is this quote. He said, "Friendship excels relationship in this, that whereas you may eliminate affection from relationship, you cannot do so from friendship. Without it, relationship still exists in name, friendship does not." So he's basically saying there, the people need to feel affection for one another for you to call it a friendship. Whereas a relationship, you can still have a relationship with somebody and not have affection for them. So like, thousands of, maybe millions of people out there are either married or have, are in some kind of relationship where they don't feel affection for one another. But that would not be a friendship. For it to be a friendship, as soon as they stop, people don't feel affection for one another. By Cicero's definition, it's no longer a friendship.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, that's how I understood it too. And I think it's a good first hurdle, like a good first step, right, towards defining friendship. And I'm interested to see all the quotes that stuck out to you, because I also there was a few that stuck out to me, and I'll go as we go along. But it's also funny. I'm sorry if I keep taking more of a comedic critique on Cicero, but also, did you notice how he starts with here's the first law, and then it's okay, cool, I'm looking forward to these next laws, and then here's here's the first rule, and then it's what happened to the laws, and then here's here's the pillar number 1 of friendship, right. And it's where are the rest of them?
right yeah, his it's very systematic, but it's kind of all over the place. Some of his rules and laws.
There were definitely drinks at this funeral.
Yeah, absolutely.
But I do agree. I think I'm seeing the way he's setting the groundwork for of relationships as a whole. Let's take that first slice into those who we feel affection for, which could be beyond friendship still, and those who we don't feel affection for, which are X, Y, and Z type of relationships, whether they're acquaintances, professional, blah blah blah.
Right. Totally. Yeah, and we did How to Win Friends and Influence People a couple podcasts back, and I think the way that Dale Carnegie is using the word friends is not what Cicero would consider a friend. That's much more an acquaintance, a colleague, somebody who you can, there can be mutual benefit for, which is another thing he kind of goes into with his definition, is that for him, friendship is something more than just somebody who can help you out and you can help them out. It's not it's not ultimately about material gain, and that though it will probably be the fact that you do gain things from each other, it's about something deeper than that.
Yeah, almost everybody else's definition of friendship, whether it's previous or after Cicero sees everything else you get out of friendship as just the byproduct of this really. Let me try to find the place. So he would also talk about the moment you meet a good friend. And was very romantic about his explanation of that. And I mean romantic more in the essence, not in the any kind of sexual nature, but just very poetic and just very emotional. That romance in that sense of when you meet, and basically without saying it, he was talking about chemistry as long as how I understood it.
Yeah.
And it was when you meet someone, your eyes are gonna lock and your heart is gonna beat and you're just gonna know you're gonna be best friends forever. Yeah. And I really love that. But it was interesting that he started there. And then to you, kind of your last point that you were saying is that he does acknowledge that although it starts with this, like what I'm going to, what we would probably call today chemistry, that true, like everything he goes into later of what makes that a really meaningful relationship is so, it's just like very deep, and anything short of that is not friendship.
Yeah, right. Well, yeah, and he even at one point says something about their souls being intertwined into like one. So it's very close to, I think, how we today think of romantic love. That some of these ancients thought about friendship. And I read Michel de Montaigne, the philosopher, wrote a piece called On Friendship as well, which I read, and it was even more romantic. And at points he talked about meeting his friend and how it was this like love at first sight, and it was just this like merging of souls. And reading it in today's eyes, I kind of questioned, like, was Montaigne homosexual? And I think it's possible. I've heard people say that might be a possibility, but it could also be the fact that that's just more of the attitude they had back then about friendship, and they saw kind of true friendship as being this like a soulmate, the way that we talk about soulmates. And both Cicero and Montaigne were talking about how rare true friendship is, and that it only happens like once in a century or something like that.
Yeah.
Which is like, yeah, it's crazy to me, because it's definitely not how I think a lot of people today think about friends. Like, oh yeah, they're friends. Whereas back then, or at least according to these guys, like a true friendship is a kind of maybe what we would term like soulmate today.
Yeah, or even that, potentially even just like what we see in movies as like this like perfect friendship that like lasts a lifetime. Maybe Cicero doesn't necessarily talk about the time variable too much, but yeah, I like to think that the friendship definition can be so close to these individuals that it doesn't matter, if it was or wasn't romantic. And I'm not saying that because like, I'm not trying to say I don't care either way. I mean, it'd be interesting to know for sure.
Yeah.
But to me, it's just like, I like the idea that friendship was just so highly regarded. And it makes sense, you like look throughout history at how friendship has been defined by philosophers or even in, literature and fiction, and it changes.
Yeah.
And I think, it's definitely a product of its time too. I know, probably back then friendships were maybe really needed, and to find a really good one was like, I don't know, just either more valuable, or because of the need, it made it easier too. Like if everybody needs to pair off as friends, then people are going to be looking for friends. I feel like nowadays that's really different. Like you want friends, but it's not cool to go look for them. So it's just like, if they happen, they happen.
Yeah. Well, and it's bizarre too, because it seems like back then, and I know I'm kind of making a broad generalization, but for much of history, like your husband or your wife was it was a much more practical relationship. It was much more like an acquaintance. It was like, we are going to have this arranged marriage so that you can work as a team to raise your kids. And it wasn't necessarily this like soul connection that we think of today as romantic, like I found my true love. Whereas back then, friendship maybe was where this kind of like soul connection was happening, or this soulmate thing. And now today, it seems like friendship is a lot more practical and about like the Dale Carnegie of like networking and, making quote friends in order to kind of advance your career. So it's kind of odd that it seems like the roles have kind of swapped, and now we've kind of we think of our soulmate as being our spouse for the most part, and our friends as maybe like our colleagues at our firm or whatnot.
You're totally right. And if we follow this pattern in like 100 or 500 years, it's going to be our like dishwasher.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
then people will be reading about these like partners and soulmates. Like, what? That's so crazy.
Yeah, it is interesting how these things change. And I mean, that's why I love reading like really old texts like this. They're like over 2,000 years, because it's just so different than the way we think about it now.
Totally. I mean, I think in some ways though, the history does kind of show that there are complexities to it too, because wasn't it Aristotle who also mentioned the utilitarian aspect of friendship? So I think there are those dimensions to it still. So it's maybe just even Cicero. I think since Cicero is just just a rom-com lover. Like just like loves the romantic element of like this, like, and just kind of like idealist and found somebody to share that relationship and that vision with, where it's just like, we are in love, right? Best friends forever.
Yeah, no, you're right. And I think I'm definitely not like a scholar or historian, but I think this was one of the first pieces in philosophy to take this stance on friendship. Because I think, like you said, like Plato and Aristotle talked about friendship much more in the kind of practical utilitarian sense. Well, it may be going off, since we're kind of already talking about the practical utilitarian sense. One thing he said about that is that if your friendship is based on that, the moment that you can no longer kind of provide for the other, or they can no longer provide for you, the friendship falls apart. So, if you've built this friendship on like, I don't know, just like getting something from the other person, and now they're in a position where they can no longer give it, like your friendship's basically crumbled, because that's what it was built on. Totally.
Yeah. And that goes like, I feel like the whole time he's hammering virtue at us, right? So like virtue is the main, insert
value. Yeah.
Insert metaphor here, pillar, glue, whatever. But yeah, it's like the main thing that's gonna give it kind of like a lasting meaningfulness. That's kind of how I would maybe oversimplify it. But yeah, I think everything that isn't virtuous, and so he actually says that what's subversive to friendship is flattery, adulation, a base compliance, like this like, I think those are just a few examples of not being virtuous, but exactly what you said too in that other quote, where it was just like, if your friendship is built on anything but this virtuous connection, then it's like doomed, and it's not a friendship under my eyes.
Right. Well, yeah, and he was also saying like that's why somebody like the rich have such a hard time making friends, is because a lot of people just want to be their friends to, for like what they can get from them from being their friends. It's not like they just truly want to, share a connection with them. It's like they're always trying to get something.
Or get something, or the opposite, right? Or like somebody's trying to get something from them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or yeah, that's what I meant. Yeah, like the friend is using them to get something. Which I think about that a lot with like celebrities. You hear about celebrities having a hard time making friends, and a lot of times, this is just a theory of mine, but I think that's probably why celebrities are a lot of times friends with one another, is because they're in this like unique position where it's like, all right, you're also a celebrity, and we both don't really want or need anything from each other in that like material sense. So we can just, be friends, and like we're also able to relate because we're both in this like weird existence.
I think that's the key, right? Like, who can you relate with? Who lives in a similar world? Like, I think a lot of us as friends talk about our surroundings, right? And how we navigate them constantly. And if, you just start talking and you're a celebrity and you're just like talking about these things that someone who doesn't live that life won't understand. Like, when we do sometimes overhear celebrities, or there's like a phone call that was recorded and we hear them complaining about something that we're just like, champagne problems about.
Yeah.
It's just like, you would find somebody who's in your, category of understanding. Sometimes that happens to line up with class. Sometimes it doesn't. I don't think it has to, but you have to find some. And Cicero talks about I think he calls it power. Like, you want to be kind of evenly keeled, so that one person isn't, using the other person.
Yeah. Yeah, totally. Totally. Is there anything on kind of like the definition that we didn't get into?
Oh, here's one thing he literally said was the golden rule. So I have, to my previous point, he says one of them was the first law. That's something else. I can read that later. The other one was the golden rule, and then the other one was another good rule.
Okay.
But
so we don't know what the hierarchy of these are, but they're all seemingly good things to note.
Yeah. Clearly like 3 whiskeys in or something.
Yeah.
Like, here's point number A. Okay, his golden rule about what your point was with like the analogy to celebrities. He says, put yourself on a level with your friends. And that's just like the little short quote I wrote, but it was he was going into it, and it was all about this. You don't want to be in a place where you can't trust your friends' intentions. Like, you have to know that they're not using you, and you have to be virtuous. I'm going to say aware, but he would say virtuous enough to, filter the power dynamic out, like not befriending people outside of your power dynamic, whether you want to look at it as up or down.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. For sure. Well, in speaking on like the virtue point, he's big on virtue, and he doesn't, I'm not sure with Cicero what virtues he's speaking of. I would guess he was talking about kind of like the 4 cardinal virtues, which would be justice, courage, prudence, and temperance, or something. Maybe I think those are the 4. But he does say, like, above all else, we should pursue virtue, and then our loyalty to our friend should come second. He says this, I think that's actually like the last thing he says in the whole piece. He says, quote, "Virtue, without which friendship is impossible, is first. But next to it, and to it alone, the greatness of all things is friendship." So this kind of comes into play when we have to choose between the two. And he gives some instances where he says sometimes a friend will try to get their friend to do something that is not virtuous, and they'll use friendship as the way to do it. So this would be like, this happens a lot with like elementary school kids. Like, oh, well, if you were really my friend, then you would, I don't know, steal that bag of potato chips for me. And Cicero says, no, we have to put virtue above that loyalty to the friendship. And if your friend asks you to do something that's not virtuous, you shouldn't do it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And he flips it, right, which he always does. He has this pattern of like, this is what you should ask and this is what you should return, which I think is always a nice, like, oh, you're so wise, Cicero.
Right. So like saying you shouldn't ask your friend to do something that's not virtuous, but likewise, you shouldn't do something virtuous or unvirtuous if your friend asks it of you.
Exactly.
That kind of, okay. Yeah.
And the burden of responsibility is on both parties equally.
Yeah.
At least that's how I understood it. And I thought, yeah, I mean, I think it's great. It's like this, like, you know, it's like, it felt like a very dad moment where it's just like you come home and like something didn't feel right about that friendship. Like, you know, I was like, I like was hanging out with Zach and he was like, if you were my friend, you'd do this podcast with me. And like, just like, I was like, that doesn't feel right to me. And then my dad, Cicero, would be like, well, here's the thing about virtue and loyalty. And like, he would get into this little spiel. It felt like a very like the thing we all wanted to hear from some adult, because we've all been through that a million times, right? And at times we've probably been the culprits of it too, like maybe even subconsciously asking, you know, I mean, in some way manipulating people around us to like just hang out with us even. And like, I don't know, I remember just being in college and just pushing people to be like, you should hang out with me, like, because I'm sad and you should come hang out with me. And then like they'd feel guilty and Cicero would be very disappointed in me.
Yeah. Well, I think too, it's maybe one of those things where, at least my understanding was, because a true friendship, you know, the two people's souls have intertwined and they've become one. So in theory, you should want what is best for the other person because they are in some sense you as well. So if you are doing something or asking them to do something that's not in their best self-interest, then you're kind of like not acting in accordance with that, because
totally. It's almost like a very religious tenet almost. You know, this whole like we're sharing our soul, we are one, we are like your and he even says like your accomplishments are my accomplishments. It's really beautiful. I definitely like in today's world and in my perspective, it's definitely something to continue to practice and strive for. Cause I think it's not always that you're not happy for the people you're closest to, but we're all really selfish and we're like, why isn't the success happening to me? Right. That's obvious. It's written about in a million books, but it's a beautiful sentiment to strive for. And it's a great way. I think it's a tool, like a device to kind of quiet that voice. I don't know if it's effective or not, but I think if we do look at friendships like we are one, your accomplishments are mine, and we practice that like almost in a religious way, I think it could be a way for us to feel less jealous. Right.
Well, because if instead of jealousy, you would feel joy because it's like your friend has you know achieved something. So rather than feeling jealous of them, you'd feel happy for them.
Yeah, totally. I guess I have trouble with it because it's just like really mushy to me. Even though I love mushy stuff, it's just kind of like. But yeah, I think it's a good like if I were writing a kid's book, like that would be in there. I wouldn't be like truly and empirically, if your friend succeeds, you will succeed too, because using, you know, our current economic blah blah blah, like that will bring you success. Like, yeah, that's
right.
Maybe more utilitarian, but
right. And he doesn't speak a whole lot about. Well, he talks about utility, but he sees that as being like a secondary gain, and that like friendship has intrinsic value in itself, and that like whatever kind of instrumental value we can get should come secondary. But maybe while we're on that topic, I just wanted to read one quick thing. This was from the Montaigne's piece on friendship, and Montaigne tells this story about this guy Cassius Blosius. That's probably not how you pronounce it. But I'm just going to read this real quick. So he came to ask Cassius Blosius, who was Grouchus's best friend, how much he would have been willing to do for him. He answered, everything. What? Everything? Pursued Laelius. And what if he had commanded you to set fire to our temples? He would never have commanded me to do that, replied Blosius. But what if he had, Laelius insisted. I would have obeyed, he replied. So I thought that was an interesting kind of contrast, because this guy, Cassius Blosius, with his friend, seems to be putting his loyalty to his friendship above virtue, which is, the opposite of Cicero. I think would have objected to that, of setting fires to the temple because your friend asked you to do it.
Oh, totally. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's a very ride or die mentality. It's just like, like once you're in, like once you're in a friendship, you can't get out. Like, we're best friends no matter what, and you're going to do whatever I need you to do, and I'll do whatever you need me to do, and like, let's go burn this shit down, Yeah. Yeah, it's very, very ride or die. I mean, I think people definitely nowadays hold loyalty. I think throughout time, many people have held that as the main principle of friendship over any other one, where, clearly Cicero is about virtue, and virtue seems to have these kind of like mechanisms to avoid kind of the blind loyalty thing from taking over.
Well, and like maybe a street gang would be a situation where, at least to be a part of that, I guess, I don't know if we call it a friendship, but loyalty to the gang has to come above virtue in that respect, where it's like, hey, if I ask you to like get in on this fight, or I ask you to kill this person, like, you have to, like, we're blood brothers, like we're bounded in this pact together, and like that has to be the number one thing.
Yeah, I think that's a great example. I think there's so many that are way less extreme too. Like, wouldn't you say that? And I don't mean that as a critique to your example. I mean that just in like, I feel like I need to be loyal sometimes when I know I should. Like, just like that social pressure to be loyal, I think exists in so many of my friendships and so many of my, not even other relationships, right? Like, sometimes you're just working at a place and you feel like you have to be loyal, or there's a boss or a parent or family or this or that. And it's just like, if we don't have filtering systems like Cicero's virtue, as an example of one filtering system, that like loyalty can take over, and then it's a blind check. If someone's just loyal and that's your main principle, it's just like, what can't you do? Like, what can't I make you do?
Right.
And because if you don't do it, then I get to hold over your head this, defined friendship we have, which is our only currency.
Right. Totally. Well, yeah, and then your virtues, or like your principles or your morals, is kind of like the corrective mechanism that is just like, oh, wait a minute, this person that I'm loyal to is asking me to do something that goes against my principles. Like, yeah, I'm going to not do that.
Yeah, totally. I think we've all been there, right? Like, so many times, even in more romantic relationships too, where somebody's just like, kind of, it feels like someone's holding over our head something. Upon discussion with another party, we could see whether we're right or wrong, but it definitely can feel sometimes like, someone's holding something over you, and loyalty is the only currency in that moment. Loyalty is the only accepted currency in that moment. So if you don't pay up, it's like you're not paying up at all.
Yeah, and even if it's just implicitly, like, there's an implicit, like, if you really loved me, you would do this.
Exactly, yes.
Yeah. Well, and I wonder, too, if, like, this is why he puts so much emphasis and importance on selecting the right friends, is because it seems like for Cicero, like, once you've kind of selected your friends, you should have some loyalty to them. But he says you shouldn't just like jump into any friendship. He kind of talks about it almost like dating. It's like, with a new friend, you should kind of like, try them on for a few weeks and see kind of what their character is like, what kind of person they really are, before you kind of commit to them and become loyal to them. And maybe the problem he sees is that, like, he says at one point, like, we we take all this time selecting these things that aren't important, like sheep, I think is the example he uses. But then when it comes to friends, we're just like, oh yeah, everybody can be my friend. So maybe that's some of it too, is that he's maybe saying we shouldn't be loyal to just anybody, but once we've kind of selected and vetted people who are deserving of our loyalty, we should, I don't know.
Yeah.
Maybe. Yeah.
Yeah, I totally understand that too. That's a great thing to bring up from this, for sure. Yeah, and it is really cute. Like, it is a total dating scenario how he puts it out.
Yeah.
You know, it's just kind of like just go out, and like, again, this is like Cicero the parent hat coming on, and just being like, yeah, I know it's your first date, like just feel it out, or like your first sleepover, like just go. I know you're nervous, feel it out, go 3 more times, and then pledge your loyalty. You know?
Yeah. Could I read this this quote that captures that?
Please.
He says, let's see. He says, quote, "We make a preliminary trial of horses, so we should of friendship, and should test our friends. We should test our friends' characters by a kind of tentative friendship." So I guess the metaphor there is to treat your friend like a horse that you're kind of taking around the block to see how they are.
Well, I get it. Like, Zach, it makes sense. Think how careful we are when we pick our horses.
Yeah.
Clearly, we need to be that careful with friends. Honestly, it's a lesson that should continue to be told today.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like,
well, and he talks about too that you're kind of the things that you're kind of vetting them for when you're in this like trial period is to see basically if they're virtuous, like if they're loyal, dependable, trustworthy, those types of things. And he says that those are kind of what the friendship is built on. And I was just thinking, I know for me, I don't know that I'm that rational when I'm choosing my friends. I think a lot of my friends, like, I know with you and me, I think the thing I was most drawn to you about was like, I thought you were like freaking hilarious and like super fun to be around. 'Cause we, we did this jazz trip, where we were playing with this jazz trip. We were playing with this jazz band in Italy, and I remember coming back and being like, "Oh, Bernardo is awesome! Like that dude is like one of the funniest guys I've ever met, and like just like super fun to be around." And I actually called you, and I was like, "Hey," because I knew you went to the college I was going to, and was like, "Hey, do you want to be my roommate?" But I don't think I was thinking about like, oh, is Bernardo a loyal guy? Is he a stand-up guy? Mm-hmm. At least at that point, I was just like, super fun hang. Like, we're always laughing. We're always making each other laugh when we're together. But I think the kind of vetting those maybe more virtuous aspects of your character didn't come until later, you know?
Oh, yeah, for sure. Or even on some of those maybe long bus rides we were on in Italy. Yeah. Where we were like getting very little sleep. Maybe you got to see some of those potentially bad characters.
Would have been weird if I was like kind of like shit testing you to see if you were a loyal person. Like
what would have been your test?
Like, I'd be like, "Hey Bernardo, you seem like a pretty cool guy. Like, I don't know if you had to choose between I don't even know.
See, I think it would have. This is what I did. You just didn't see it behind the scenes. Whenever you were asleep, I'd grab my horse saddle that I brought with me, and I would see if it fit you first, and then I would brush the back of your mane, and then I would see how much hair would fall out. And I was like, I'm gonna vet this horse real good here, and then I was like, this dude's for real. And then we were best friends forever, and now I pledge my loyalty to you.
Wow. You took the horse metaphor very literally, and it worked.
Yeah, it's doctrine now. Here we go.
Yeah. That's amazing.
Yeah, I think it's interesting though. I love going back and thinking about all these friendships that we've made, and this, like even yours and I. We should talk about your and my relationship.
Yeah.
Because it's been one that, since 2006.
Yeah.
Yeah. Which is a long time, especially if you're listening to this really far in the future. But for me, it was the same thing, but I think it was also because it was a product of our youth, like in the same way that even romantic relationships, like some of my first romantic relationships, I didn't know what I was supposed to look for. It was just kind of like, I'm attracted to you and you're not being mean to me, so I guess we should do it.
Right.
And like in the friendship way, it was the same thing. It was like, I want, somebody that I can like laugh with, and somebody that gets the jokes, you know what I mean? Like, because it's also like there's plenty of people who like humor but don't get the jokes. Whatever the is for everyone is different, but you and I just seem to be kind of on the same level, and in some really selfish way, I could like kind of platform myself and just like do a quick little stand-up routine, and you would just listen to the whole thing, and nobody else would. Everybody was like, who is this kid? He's so annoying. Like, we don't even want him in Italy.
Yeah, man. Well, you were talking about like when you're younger, the things that you're looking for both in a friend and a partner are very different than the things that you look for as you age. I think that's totally true. And it's actually one of the things Cicero says is we can't really choose a friend in our youth because we haven't finished kind of like becoming the people that we ultimately are. Like basically he's saying like people change so much between, adolescence and young adulthood, that Cicero is saying like a lot of the friends that we make in adolescence don't remain friends because we get to college and we realize like, oh, the only reason I was friends with that person is because we both like the color blue, or like we grew up on the same street.
Yeah.
Whereas I think the friends you make further along into adulthood are a lot more. They tend to be a lot more people that you share the same values with or the same passions and aspirations with.
Absolutely. I 100% agree with that for sure. Yeah, it's also, I feel like part of being an adult is just like kind of, you're the sole person responsible for everything that gets dumped on just you, right? Like responsibility. So it's like, when we look for friends, we have all of the history of like just friendship knowledge that we've lived through, so we can say like, these are the things I like, but also we're living lives with way more responsibility, and we need people who understand that, like we were talking about before with like tiers of people in your understanding tier. But also like, we just like don't want to put up with like any more friend bullshit, like,
yeah.
When we're older, we just don't, like, before we could have hung out and like I would have been cool, or you would have been cool if I just like decided to be like a fucking 19-year-old and just like smoke a cigarette indoors, and like you would have been like, whatever, like maybe I don't like it, but like whatever.
Yeah.
But like now it's just like, I don't have time for that. Like I don't have time to worry about this. Man. I don't have time to like try to talk you into anything. So like you're not the horse for me right now.
Man, it's so true. And I think that applies to romantic relationships as
Absolutely.
Well. You look at like a 18-year-old, 19-year-old, 20-year-olds, and they're like, oh, they make a lot more exceptions for the people that they're willing to date. Oh, maybe this could work. You get into 30, 40, 50, first day, it's just like, oh, deal breaker, absolutely not. Like a lot more quick to like both know what you want and like you said, you kind of put up with less bullshit. I know that's definitely the case with me, both with friends and romantic relationships. Like as I've gotten older, it's just I'm a lot more okay just being like, nope, Like, that's not gonna work.
Yeah, like this. It's really even when people are nice and sweet, and you just like know that like, oh, it's just not gonna like it's this is gonna be really weird to say out loud because we usually use it for relationships, but like saying it, even though we won't say that, we'll express it, but saying like, I'm sorry, I don't think this friendship is gonna work out. You know, because we've already done the math and we're filtering. Of course, we could be wrong and everything, but we, within our experience, we've done the math and been like, this person's really eager to be my friend. They're very nice, but there's clearly like a huge, maybe even power dynamic or age difference where they're seeing me more as like this blank figure, but they're trying to be my friends. And it's just like, how do I let this, you know, overzealous, eager, young, even if it's a younger version of myself sometimes, that I'm just like, hey, this is really sweet. If you want help on something, I can help on something, but I just don't think we should be friends right now. Again, I would never say it. We have to find other ways of saying that because it's like taboo to talk about friendship like that. But
totally. Jerry Seinfeld has a bit where he says after 30, he's like, my roster's full. He's like, my whole team's full. My friendship roster's full. It's like, sorry, like there's no room on the roster. Like anybody that wants to be his friend.
Totally.
So you could just say that, like, my roster's full.
I love it.
Yeah.
I love it.
Well, on that kind of note too, Cicero talks a little bit about ending a friendship.
Oh,
and
I was just thinking of that.
Go. Well, he says sometimes it's unavoidable. And I don't know, I felt like he copped out a little bit here because his best advice for ending a friendship is to just like be more selective when you're picking a friend so that it never gets to that point. But I guess the one thing he does say, or one of the things he does say, is that when you end a friendship, you don't want it to be you don't want to do it violently. So he says, next, we should take care that friendship is not converted into active hostility from which flow personal quarrels, abusive language, and angry recriminations. And then he says, our first object then should be to prevent a breach. Our second, to secure that, if it does occur, our friendship should seem to have died a natural rather than a violent death. So kind of letting the friendship fade out rather than having a big blowout, which would, have resentments and all of this other hostility.
Yeah, I'll add to that. I don't know if it's in the same section, but he also says, at least in this translation, he says, like you want it to unstitch instead of, what is it, tear apart? Torn. Yeah. Yeah. When friendships die, it's better to have them unstitched than it is for them to be torn. And I think that kind of goes with exactly what you're saying, which is just like, if it ends, right? Because you're saying at all costs, Cicero's just like, if your friendship's ending, like that wasn't a real friend, and you didn't vet them and their resume properly. But if it does end, it should be gently unstitched instead of torn.
Totally.
Yeah.
Totally. And I wanted to maybe push back on this point a little bit about like, if it had to end, then it, you didn't vet them properly. Because my thought is that certain people can come together at certain points in their life, and then come apart as well. Like, for whatever reason, these two people linked up and were good for each other and, shared a connection here. And then that just, was no longer benefiting both of them, or it faded for whatever reason, and I think that's perfectly fine. I don't know.
I can tell, Zach. I can tell you're fine with that. I can tell from the year 2017 till now. I could tell. No, just joking. Yeah. I'm totally joking. This is a time for me to do a big shout out to one of the greatest personal philosophers in my life, which is my mom. So maybe she got it from somewhere else. So I'm not claiming that she's the sole creator of this, but she told me once that friendship is circumstantial. And I hated thinking about that because I think I used to hold this very romantic, almost Cicero-like outlook, an oversimplified Cicero outlook of, romantic friendship, that like once you find your fox and you're the hound, like it's like ride or die, and like you'll be in each other's life forever, and like like this is it until one of you gets hunted. Like this is, it's just like that was the way I saw friendship. I'd come to my mom and, in tears sometimes of like losing friends for whatever reason. In all stages of my life, I come to tears with my mom. And, she would just tell me this, and we'd talk about it. She wouldn't just like drop the mic and leave the room, but she'd say, and of course explain it, that like friends are circumstantial. And she would explain that there was as much good as there is bad, or there's as much hope as there is loss in that phrase. So to what you were saying, Zach, I would agree with that. I think it's okay that circumstances change and that friendships drift. There's always a possibility that they can drift back. It doesn't have to be a good or bad thing always. It's really sad to think about if you're a romantic and you are, have this concept that you created of like what it is to be in a friendship, which is, potentially unhealthy, but it is something I struggle with and I have to constantly think about. So I think it's great advice. I have to practice it. I wish I was better at it, but there's my mom's wisdom.
Totally. I love that. And the circumstance could just be that you two shared a hobby that you no longer share. And I know there's situations like that where it's like, you guys were you were super close friends with somebody because you're both on the soccer team, and now you're not on the soccer team. It's like there's no longer this thing that to stay in touch with this person. It's like the whole friendship was based around like you being a team member of the soccer team. And
oh my gosh, and we all had those, right? Like, I mean, that was one of the hardest things, just from going from high school to college or college to real life, like these next chapters in our lives, right? Where we were so tight and so close around the same people for like 4+ years straight. And then all of a sudden it's like, at least in our life, it's like everybody either moved to New York or back home.
Yeah.
And then it was like, oh my gosh, these people who I considered even my best friends, like someone I lived with for years, is like all of a sudden drastically out of my life. And it's out of all of our controls in a way, all of our control.
Totally. And Cicero talks a little bit about that, like about that being one of the reasons that friendship ends. He also says one of the reasons they end is like political disagreements, which apparently I found this was kind of interesting, that he lost a close friend through that. Like, I guess he was close friends, not Atticus, but another person. I can't remember the name.
I know who you're talking about.
Yeah, that it was like they had a falling out because of differing ideologies, which can kind of go back to when we're talking about like, when you're a kid or an adolescent, a lot of times your ideologies haven't fully formed, and once you get into adulthood, it's like, oh, okay, well, we definitely don't see eye to eye on these fundamental issues.
Yeah, and issues that we just, whether without judgment, we hold them to such high value, to such a high value that when we have that initial chemistry with somebody and it's like, oh my gosh, you'd be an amazing friend or an amazing partner, we're still willing to be like, nope, sorry, you don't. Yeah. Like this is a like that. Your view on this is just like absolutely not in line with me. Therefore, we can't be blank. And as kids, it's like we don't care. Like maybe we'll make a fuss about like not having brand Capri Sun and like you're drinking off-brand juice box, and like that's as much like ideology as we get into as kids.
Yeah, right. Yeah, most kids aren't like debating these super heavy controversial issues.
Yeah, totally. Do you have friends though, as an adult, that whether it's on purpose or not, like you can think about it, do you gloss over a lot of topics, ideologies, methodologies that are controversial? Again, I don't really care as much of on purpose or not, because I think both can exist. But do you have those where you like maintain a good friendship based on other things? And even if it's based on something that may seem surface level, but it's enough to keep a spark, and it's not necessarily necessary to like check in and see if we're lining up in every way?
Totally. Well, and I think this is where, like I said, somebody like Cicero would say, usually you want to line up with friends that share your values, but at the same time, you don't want to surround yourself with like yes men or just like people that are just going to, and you mentioned this earlier, people that are just going to like agree with whatever you say, because he sees that flattery as being like super toxic, both to the flatterer and the flattery. I don't know if that's a word, but the person being flattered. So if you just surround yourself and you're living in this little filter bubble of everybody that thinks like you, believes all the things that you do, that there's definite problems with that. And he says at another point, that's one of the jobs of a friend, is to basically challenge you, or to like call you on your shit, for lack of a better word. And maybe I'll bring up that quote as well. But so I don't know. I know for me, that's something I think about a lot. And like, okay, am I surrounding myself with just a bunch of people that think the same things and share the same ideologies as me? Like, because I don't really want to do that. So I actively seek out people, maybe not as like close soulmate friends, but I actively seek out people and hang out with people and communicate with people who like think and share very different ideologies and values from my own.
Yeah, I think that's great. Yeah, and I'm wondering if Cicero would, it fitting into Cicero's equation, if any of those would be considered friendships, or if those would be more, utility acquaintances. And then back to my question, if like these more Cicero-like friendships, does it matter at the end, like after X amount of time or X amount of like, or maybe once you've vetted them, does it really matter that you may disagree, or does it really matter that you may agree on everything? As long as, of course, you don't have a yes man at your side always, or vice versa, like you're the yes man to them. Yeah. There's no power dynamics. Like all these little things are already checked off. And then if all those things are checked off, virtuous, loyalty, like everything Cicero spells out, do we need to have, like, can a friendship exist without having the depth of our values being brought up every time, or all these things? It's just a question I have, because I feel like I have friendships that feel very close to me, but like we haven't talked about politics in years.
Totally. Yeah. And I mean, it's probably a person to person thing. Like I don't know that I would want a friend that shared all of my same thoughts and beliefs on things. Like that would be kind of boring. But there's probably like core values that we have to share. Like a core value of mine is like honesty, or a core value of mine would be like seeking growth and seeking truth. Whereas if that, I could see if
from
I'm
crystals,
dealing with,
though.
Yeah, from crystals.
Yeah, seeking truth from crystals.
Yeah. So if somebody wasn't into that, then that would kind of dissolve the rest of the relationship. But
and those are like trying to plug them in a, or at least connected with Cicero. I guess those are like those would be our own like vetting measures or prerequisites or virtues, right? Like virtue itself as a definition has like changed so much throughout each century.
Yeah.
So yeah, that totally makes sense, and it's good to. I love your first two. I forget what the third one was, because I got lost in the first two. But honesty and a, what did you say? Like search for truth.
Yeah, search for truth or growth.
Yeah.
Yeah. I was gonna one more thing while we're talking about the yes man that he said that I thought was super fascinating. So this is actually a quote from Cato the Elder, another philosopher, a little around Cicero's time. So Cato says, there are people who owe more to bitter enemies than to apparently pleasant friends. The former often speak the truth, the latter never. So I got the sense what Cato's saying here is like, your enemies will let you know when you mess up, or they'll let you know when you're, not good. Whereas your friends, to kind of appease you, they might be, oh, that was really good job. And like, I don't know, you just bombed a open mic or something. I don't know. But I think that's a powerful idea that we owe, what does he say? There are people who owe more to bitter enemies than apparently pleasant friends. The former often speak the truth, the latter never. I thought about like maybe one of the curses of being a really nice person or a really attractive person is a lot of times people are not willing to let you know that you are not good at something. And yeah, which can be a curse in its own way. You're not kind of getting that feedback from the world.
Yeah. Okay, I would love to talk about this more.
Yeah.
So it seems some questions. It seems like if your enemies, so the way he's putting out is like your enemies just like have no filter. They have no reason to have a filter, so they're going to let you know honestly. I would disagree with the word maybe honestly, because wouldn't you say that your enemies in this Machiavellian, world that Cicero or Cato's putting us in, like, wouldn't you say that our enemies have a motivation to see us, to degrade us, to see us fail a little bit? So I would even say that maybe they would see things honestly, but what they would tell us as an enemy in this sense might actually be dishonest and might be over-exaggerated or oversimplified or,
Or said just to harm us.
Exactly.
Just to hurt us. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think, though, that still matches with the other side of it. Like, I wouldn't edit the other side of it because I do think, when friendships aren't built always on really great things. And if you are a really nice person, sometimes the people who would call themselves your friends are just like yes people around you, or do just say what you want to hear. Maybe you're nice, maybe you're attractive, maybe it's something like that, or you're powerful.
Yeah.
And they have a motivation to do that too. So it's like maybe it's more about the motivation or intent behind, the definition of your relationship. So like if you're talking about it to an enemy, it's knowing that what they're going to say isn't going to be honest. And if you're talking to a yes person or a yes friend, that their response is also going to not be honest. But I get the
sentiment.
Exactly. Yeah. And it's so nice to say it that way. Like, let me drop some truth on you kind of moment, right? Like your enemies are going to be way more honest with you than your friends are. And I get the sentiment and I can appreciate it.
No, that's a great point that you brought up, is that your enemies, though your friends will have incentive to dress up the truth, your enemies will have incentive to tear you down. So, yeah, and I think what Cicero is saying is the ideal would be a friend who has your best interest in mind and is going to tell you what you need to hear, maybe in an honest but delicate way.
Yeah, like a practice almost, right? Like part of being a friendship is this practice, like something that won't come naturally to you. Because at times we do just want to be really nice to our friends. We see that they're hurt, right? Like we see our friends are like, or really wanting to hear an answer. Like you just came off stage and you're like, how did I do? It's like the worst question to ask someone. Like,
yeah. Well, yeah.
Yeah, right? Like, because you can see it. You could hear it in their voice, what they want to hear. Like, what did you think? How did I do? Am I good? And it's just like he's telling us now, Cicero's telling us that like as a friend, we have to practice being honest, even if those opportunities arise where we could tell a friend what they want to hear. We have to practice this level of virtue of just being like, probably we could be like, I'd love to talk more about it with you. Maybe after the show, let's grab a drink now and pretend like you did okay.
Yeah.
I was the only one clapping.
Totally. Yeah, it's a tough one. Because it gets into like the constructive criticism thing and like,
right.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah. There's this phrase I say in one of my relationships with someone I'm really close to, and it's just like, do you need someone that's going to listen, or do you need somebody who gives you ideas back? And I've always like really liked that, of just like, sometimes we do need to vent, right? But with friends, this is, we could take it another step with other friends and be like, this would be really awful, but we could be like, do you want me to tell you what you want to hear? Or do you want me to tell you what I really think? Or do you want me to just listen? Or,
Right. Or even just, do you want my feedback, or do you want me to just listen?
Yeah.
I don't know. There's probably
to brush your mane.
A less, there's probably a delicate way of saying that. But I get, that's a great sentiment of like, that person's need in that moment might be to get feedback. It might be like you said, I just got off stage. The time for constructive criticism, is
right.
That person's way too emotional, adrenaline rush, and like.
But it's like what everybody asks off the stage. I know this isn't what we're talking about, but isn't it so true? Like everybody off the stage is just like, including myself, is like, "What'd you think?" And it's just like, why would I put people in that position?
Totally.
It's an awful position because I'm not ready for constructive criticism. And when it does come, I react and I'm like, what? Where'd that come from?
Totally. It's actually something my drum teacher, Art Gore, in college, he told me, he said, always wait a week after a performance before listening to yourself.
Totally.
And I think he was getting to the same thing. Like you're just less emotional. You're less attached to it. It's like, oh, that was me last week.
Yeah.
If it really sucks, you're like, oh yeah, but I've been practicing all week, so I don't sound like that anymore. But you're just less attached to it. And I think I try to use that same. I guess that same thing could be applied to giving somebody criticism, is to do it a week later when they're less emotionally attached to it.
Totally. Oh my goodness, yes. Yeah, just being like, maybe the phrase being something like yeah, let's talk about it later. Like just always throwing that out when somebody's like, it's like, I'd love to hear what you thought. Like, or you just come off stage and it's like, how'd I do? It's like, man, let's grab a drink. Like, just relax right now. Let's talk about it later.
Yeah, totally.
And then, like, once you sit them down, then you can be like, I think we should stop being friends. Your performance was atrocious.
You're not a good horse.
You're not a good horse.
Or a piece of furniture.
Hey. Oh, yeah. Yeah, totally.
Any of the above.
Yeah.
Yeah. There was one section that we skipped over a little bit when we were talking about like some of the perks of having friends. Or actually, I don't even think we've talked about this yet. So yeah, I don't think
there are any.
Yeah, what are the perks of having friends? Well, so one of the things that he talks about is, he says, like, your friends celebrate your triumphs and accomplishments with you, and they also make the your trials and tribulations and your bad times better. So I got the sense that he's like, they make the good even better, and they make the bad not so bad. And just to read this quote, so we can hear it from Cicero rather than my paraphrasing, he says, "Is not prosperity robbed of half its value if you have no one to share your joy?" And I loved this because he's saying, I think what he's saying there is like half of, like, whenever you share that moment with another person, it just magnifies it. And I know Tony Robbins says something similar. He's like, what's the first thing that you do after you receive really good news? You text your friend, or what's the first thing you do after something really crazy or funny happens to you? You call or you text your friends. You want to like share that moment with somebody else because it just magnifies it. And I think the same is true when it comes to the opposite, which is like when something bad happens to us. He says, quote, "On the other hand, misfortunes would be hard to bear if there were not someone to feel them even more acutely than yourself." So it's that same thing, what's the, one of the first things we do when, tragedy befalls us is we reach out to a friend, and, they're able to kind of help carry that burden, at least until we can manage it on our own.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, it is an absolutely beautiful sentiment. It's such a great parachute for the emotional roller coaster, right? I'm just gonna mix all the metaphors here. It's it's like this parachute on the boat that we call Six Flags. Yeah, it's true, I think, to some degree too, right? I know that's saying something is true is loaded, but and it's going to be different for everyone, but yeah, I know you and I have been there for each other through really hard times, and it's made the hard times so much more bearable, even if we don't realize it at the time, and there's no way, like there's no counterfactual argument we could make if we weren't there for each other. Like, we actually don't know how important we were beyond just like what we can hypothesize after the fact, but I really do think that's so true. And then I agree with you and with Tony Robbins that the first thing I do when I get good news is I text Tony Robbins, and let him know. Sorry, I should just say friends.
But you were friends with Tony before he was big, before he was Tony.
Exactly.
You weren't one of those fair weather Tony Robbins friends.
No.
You guys were boys way back.
Oh yeah, we were horses of the same mane, for sure. Yeah. Yeah, horses of a feather.
Yeah, flock together.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. No, it's No, go ahead.
Oh, I was just gonna say, it reminds me a bit of like the Beatles song, "I Get By with a Little Help from My Friends." I mean, that's what that song's all about. It's like, your friends lift you up when you're feeling down. By the way, I also thought it was really cool that quote, "A friend in need is a friend indeed," is a paraphrase from a quote that Cicero quotes.
No way.
Did you catch that?
No.
Where was this? Yeah, let me find this. He says, "What Anicius says is quite true. The hour of need shows the friend indeed." Isn't that cool?
One more time.
So, all right. "What Anicius says is quite true. The hour of need shows the friend indeed."
Dang.
So I thought that was cool because this goes back before Cicero. So that quote is at least 2,000 years old.
Dang. Wow. I would have guessed Shakespeare when in doubt, but like,
yeah, he's a good default to guess.
Wow. How cool is that? That's also who we get the quote, I wast a poet and I hast not known it.
Is that also Anicius?
Mm-hmm. And now we know it is.
Yeah. Now we know it's him.
Exactly.
But that idea is a really powerful one. I mean, I know it's become a cliche, but I mean, it's basically saying, like, a fair weather friend is not a friend. The true friend is the person that's there before you have your celebrity, or after you have your celebrity, or after the sex tape comes out, or you know what I mean? Like, it's the person that's there for you when you're at your lowest.
Totally. And Cicero talks about all those tests. I don't have them to quote, but he mentions all these times when, like, through being vilified or being publicly shamed, or like, through losing all of your political power or gaining all of this political power, he talks about that, like, that will test your friendship, and that will test your virtue. And it's so true. It's lovely, and it's arguably a good practice too, of just like, friendship is work sometimes. Like, people say relationships are work, right? Like, yeah, it totally is sometimes. And sometimes you have to, nobody wants to hear this about themselves, but sometimes I need a friend to hate what I'm saying for like the next 2 hours. Like, like I needed that. Thank you. Thank you for being there when I was at my lowest and I just vented, and I just cried, or whatever.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, the other thing I was thinking, so one of the reasons I thought this piece would be really cool with the two of us is, we met, I think, when we were at like 17, 18, right around that. And, we were roommates in college, like lived together, and then, have been living in different cities for the last 10 years or so, but have still remained close friends and stay connected. And it's very similar to Cicero and Atticus's relationship, whereas they met as young politicians when they were around the same age, and then lived in different cities and maintained contact through letters. So, like, at first I was like, oh, it'd be so perfect to do this piece. It would just be too perfect. But something I was thinking along those lines is, I think one of the advantages of having a friend in a different city who you're not seeing on the day-to-day is they're not like caught up in all of your drama, and can kind of, like, in times of need. I think about that a lot. I can call you, talk to Bernardo. Like, it's not, I'm not kind of, you know what I mean? Like, there's a certain distance there where it's like, they're not existing in this social circle that I'm currently a part of. Right. They're able to kind of have this outside perspective that is, is really nice and really comforting.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think to add to some of that too is that it helps us avoid the whole, like, treating our friends like therapists, or in Cicero's terms, like, getting an unvirtuous use out of our friends, like an unequal use out of it. It avoids that happening because, like you said, like, everyday drama. It's easy to, like, if we were roommates, to just be like, oh, you wouldn't believe this, and then like this, and then we can get into a habit of feeling good in a really selfish way of, like, I'm gonna just talk to Zach about these problems, and then before you know it, I'm wearing down the relationship doing that, and having this distance definitely. I'd like to think that we wouldn't do that anyway, of course, but the distance definitely helps filter that stuff out. So when we really do need each other, we are able to be friends, and we don't have to be, daily or weekly therapists, or daily or weekly cheerleaders, or any kind of, maybe in Cicero's terms, unvirtuous. We don't have to be any kind of unvirtuous. We don't have to do any unvirtuous acts on a daily basis, but instead we have, like you said, distance, time, and we can just evaluate things as they go. And I still really think all those years we had when we actually did live together, when we talked every day, built this really strong, amazing foundation where, when we don't talk for weeks or months even, that's like, we can still kind of, the whole cliche of like, we just pick up where we left off. It's kind of true though. Especially when one of us is in distress or when we got some really great news, we can celebrate each other. We can be there for each other, and it doesn't feel like it's a strain.
Totally. Well, yeah, man, I'm happy to call you a friend for sure. And this was great. This was like super awesome.
Yay! How'd I do?
So awesome. We'll talk about it. We'll talk about it later.
How'd I do?
We'll talk about it later.
Sounds great, man.
Thanks for listening to Unpacking Ideas. If you enjoyed the episode, please share it with a friend or scroll down and write us a review. I know that takes a little bit of effort, but it really helps with the algorithm so that more people can discover the show. So thanks for doing that in advance. And if you would like to hear more from me or read along with us, please visit unpackingideas.com, where I post links and articles to future podcast episodes. All right, guys, that will do it for today. Thanks for listening, and I will see you next episode.